Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian. I'm co-founder at Ruby Reese and I will also be your host. This week we are chatting with an amazing guest. Suzi Walsh is back in the hot seat to chat with us and I'm really looking forward to letting you listen in on the chat that we had. This week we've been extremely busy with the launch of our new venture, dognutrition.ie. It's been months and months in the works. As all these things, you have to put in an awful lot of study and certification and then building websites and all of the nuts and bolts that go on in the background of any business. And finally, it's coming out there to the rest of the world. So I just wanted to touch on the fact that that exists. We will probably do a podcast as soon as possible to explain a little bit more about some of the elements of that. But without further ado, I think we're just going to jump straight into this brilliant chat that I had with Suzi, because I enjoyed speaking about it so much with her, and I'm excited for you to now listen in. So hope you enjoy. Hello, Suzi. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me again on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm brilliant, thank you. Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself briefly once again?
My name is Suzi Walsh and I work as a dog behaviourist and trainer in Dublin. I've been working with dogs for about 18 years professionally and I still love every second of it.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I love the fact that you're coming back on to chat with me again. And I love this topic that we chose to speak about. So let's jump straight in. What do we even mean when we talk about giving dogs autonomy in their lives?
So autonomy, and that's inclusive for everybody. So that's basically giving somebody, a dog or a person or, any other animal, choice in their life so that they can make decisions and they can feel fulfilled by, just not being confined by rules and regulations. So can you imagine being a dog and where you don't choose where you get to live, you don't get to choose who you live with, you don't get to choose where you sleep, you don't get to choose where you eat, you don't get to choose when you go for a walk, you don't choose what you do in your walk because you're restricted on a lead, or you don't even get to choose your food, you don't get to choose nothing. And so that can be really frustrating for a lot of dogs, and a lot of different breeds of dogs can find that really kind of very stressful. So anytime we can give our dogs choice or autonomy in their lives, it's really beneficial. And we've seen from studies and we've seen from just improvements in dog behavior that having a little bit of autonomy in their own lives is really important, because you have to remember that dogs aren't on this planet to be self-servient species to humans. They're actually a species unto their own right that have their own innate behaviors. And it's really important that they at least get to make some decisions in their life.
Yeah, it's kind of, you have to take a deep breath and think, wow, we really do kind of constrain our dogs and into kind of fitting into our world and our lives. So yeah, it definitely sounds important.
And apart from maybe caged animals, maybe, like hamsters or small rodents, dogs of all species get very little control. Like a lot of the time, cats will get a lot of choice of when they eat, when they go, when they sleep, when they do different things like that. And a lot of the times, dogs don't, even to the fact that when we have them outdoors, we have them on a lead all of the time. So they only get to go where we want to go or where we deem suitable. And that can be really hard. If you could imagine your life as a dog, I think, some of us would find that very stressful.
Absolutely, yeah. They might want to be out in the countryside enjoying themselves, having a good sniff around, and you're dragging them along to the local espresso bar in the middle of a city.
Yeah, or you're on a school run and you really hurry to get and they just want to, take a moment and smell a tree.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll be moving on to how we can give them some autonomy in a second, because I've got loads of questions there. But so you mentioned about their overall well-being, and there's probably been a lot of studies done on how it affects their well-being, does it? I presume number one on a stress side.
Yeah, there's not a colossal amount of studies because most dog research has actually only come about in the last 10 years or so. I think there's more and more happening, which I love to see. And every week now, it seems there's a new study coming out, which makes me very excited. But there's been several studies done on dogs, both. And there's one really interesting one because they took kennel dogs and they tried to give them a little bit of choice, even choice of what toy they liked, what food they ate, where different resting places, even access to different spaces in the kennel environment. And they noticed barking behavior, destructive behavior went down, stress-related behavior, pacing, circling, all went down. And also there was the reverse of that, where they also studied dogs where they gave them less autonomy over their own lives and started really constraining and scheduling and, you know, not giving the dogs any choices. And obviously the stress went up, and barking behavior and destructive behavior and even self-mutilation went quite sky high in those dogs. So kennel environments are quite an interesting, and not that we want to see dogs in a lot of kennel environments or shelter environments, but they're really interesting because you can control a whole cohort of dogs and control, you know, a lot about their lives. And so we can get a lot of research from that.
And I suppose it's probably comparable to a prison in human terms, you know, where the prison guards control everything that goes on in your life. And I guess if you were living in a prison cell for 23 hours a day and you were told what to do with your hour out of cell, would be very different to if you were given choices. You know, you can go out in the yard, you can go to the library, you can go here, whatever the different options are. You'd say, wow, that's great, I've got a bit of choice. So it's so understandable and so relatable, I suppose, in a conceptual way, that the dogs would also really benefit from having that kind of, you know, choice in their lives. And have you seen a lot of dogs kind of improve, let's say, behaviors and I suppose their emotional health when they're given a little bit more autonomy as well?
Oh, 100%. Actually, most of the work that I do with dogs and most of the behavior modification is all led through choice. And that's becoming more and more like the way I worked was slightly different 5-10 years ago. And now it's all rewarding good choices. What I deem the choices that I like the dog to make and reinforcing them for those decisions rather than necessarily forcing them to, not that I ever particularly forced a dog, but using kind of instructional terms like, you know, cueing the dog to do something. Instead, what I like to do, and even this evening when I was out in a case, I was rewarding the dog for relaxed behavior. So, you know, just like yourself, Killian, I can tell you to lie down, and I'm sure you'd do that for me, and that would be very nice, and I can treat you for that, but I can't tell you to relax. That's something that you have to be able to do yourself. And so the same goes with the dog. So when we're working with a dog and say we want to take a very high energy dog, a very stressed dog, and we want to make them relaxed in a particular environment, what we just start to do is reward for those behaviors that they offer themselves. And so they've made the choice to relax. They've made the choice to settle down. And so they've made the choice to do something, and reinforcing for that behavior and making that choice a reward for them so that they do it more frequently. What's rewarded gets repeated. So we use behavior modification in order to reward choices that the dog has already made, but also giving the dog that ability to make those choices and setting them up for success.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely.
And it's wonderful.
I'd love
and
to be rewarded for relaxing.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? And and because we're not instructing the dog to do it, they'll then offer it more frequently, and then it becomes habitual. So because relaxing is, they're getting a double reward, they're relaxing and they're getting a treat at the same time. It's like I used to work for guide dogs for the blind, and people are always shocked that we used to feed the dogs from the table. Shock. And actually it was feeding them from the table if they were lying down and not looking at you. So now you would bring a dog into a restaurant, my own dogs included, and they go, there's a table. It's a really good idea if I lie down and don't look at anyone under that table. And then that becomes really rewarding for them. So they're less likely to do stress-related behaviours or barking and any kind of attention seeking or crying or whining or howling. And I think that goes through, there's no, you know, that's probably the most common thing I work with a dog. The most common skill is settling and teaching them how to relax, because then they sleep more. They're less stressed. They don't have to vocalize, and all dog vocalizations are stress related anyway. So you get a huge amount of success from that and that alone. And it's one of the nicest things, and it happens really fast. Like in a week, you can take a dog from being quite a highly aroused, stressed dog to quite a dog that opts to relax more and more often, because they have to sleep much more than we do anyway. And so it's a really nice thing to do. And then they enjoy it, and you just have a calmer dog, and it's lovely.
So now I'm going to have to be a bit difficult and go back to the feeding at the table, because there's going to be someone listening in and saying, this is brilliant, we've had so many table time troubles. Can you undo years of unwittingly rewarding bad table manners by feeding the dog that's causing a ruckus at the table,
And
by
I
then
love
going
that you
ahead
said
and
bad table
rewarding.
manners. I love that you said bad table manners and not bad behavior. So you know me well. Yeah, because I know there's no such thing as
Exactly.
bad behavior, but bad table manners, of course you can. So especially when it hasn't been effective for the dog and effective for the human, because people tend to obviously, you know, in human nature, shout at their dogs or tell their dogs to go to bed or put them out of the space or anything like that. When actually, in fact, and you'll always have somebody in the family who's guiltily, sneakily feeding the dog something. And I always find that
Always.
entertaining. Often in a family, I'll get them to
Yeah.
sit around the table and I'll see who the dog goes to. And then they have to admit that they fed the dog from the table before. But I don't, instead of telling the human side, no, you can't feed the dog from the table, because often granny or grandpa or uncle or aunt or dad or somebody wants to feed the dog or seek the dog food. Instead, I say, well, wait until they lie down. Now, there's a transitionary period that you have to go through to get to that point. Your dog's not going to just start relaxing and lying down. But you can 100% change that behavior and have a dog who just calmly lies by the table when you're eating, or in a certain space if you don't want them in a certain space. Same as if you're cooking, same as if you're eating while you're watching television, same as if you're in a cafe, anything like that. So, and what we're doing is trying to encourage the dog to make good choices and rewarding for those choices. They're choices that we want them to make, but they're also nicer for them as well, for providing that setup that they do that.
And presumably, like everything to do with training and behavior, consistency is key then in rewarding every time they do that specific behavior you want.
Yeah, and it's really important to get, I suppose, your timing right. So if you're capturing for calm behavior, for example, we want to usually talk. I don't know what anybody else's hand-eye coordination is like, but mine is pretty poor. So I have to toss the dog the treat, because if I attempt to hand the dog the treat, the dog will have gotten up and come towards me before they get the treat, and then you're capturing the wrong behavior. So the rules for me is the dog has to be lying down and not looking at me, and then I'll toss them a treat. It doesn't matter if they get up to eat the treat once the treat lands when they're lying down, not looking at me. You know, and at the beginning, there's a time period where the dog doesn't really understand what's going on, but as you rehearse it, they get better and better, and then it's really, really hard to get them to do something different. You know, even by the end of the session, the dog I was at this evening, she just kept lying down by my feet. I had a period of time where she'd look at me through the corner of her eye and kind of glance towards me to see if there was something happening. But yeah, you end up with a much more chill dog, and a chill dog is then harder to wind up, harder to trigger, harder to get to the point of over threshold, because it's harder to do that when they're relaxed. I'll always explain it to clients, saying that if I'm really comfortable watching television, but I really fancy a chocolate biscuit, I have an internal imbalance in my brain going, am I too lazy to get the chocolate biscuit, or do I want the chocolate biscuit? And often the laziness will actually win. So yeah, depending on what the reward is. So it's much harder than even for dogs to trigger to doorbells or trigger to visitors or anything like that. So it's a really I'd encourage anybody who listens to this is to teach their dog to settle off cue and encourage settling behavior, and engage with their dog when they're settling, not when they're snoring and passed out, but when they're relaxing, rather than I think we spoke about this before, rather than going, oh, my dog is really calm and relaxed, don't disturb them, leave them be. And yeah, that's important to let sleeping dogs lie, and that's true, but there's a balance where if your dog is actually just chilling out and relaxing, that's when you really should be engaging with them and rewarding and marking for that behavior. Whereas we're all really bad at only engaging with it. Yeah, we're already bad at only engaging with a dog when they are actively seeking engagement. And that then can spiral into, you know, barking, attention-seeking behavior, mouthing behavior, humping behavior. I can, you know, lots of different things like that.
Yeah. And actually, I suppose one of the things that probably works well, now every dog's an individual anyway, but what seems to work very well for Ruby in our context is, you know, when she's kind of getting into that relaxing mode, she loves belly rubs. You know, it's like there's different types of kind of, you know, energy rewards, I suppose, for different situations. And I think, like, you know, that's really her thing, where she's like, she'll just lie there back on her back and, you know, with her belly up, waiting for belly rubs. And that's kind of, you know, her way of relaxing and communicating. Yeah.
Because it's a really interesting study from 2016. I think I spoke about this before in your podcast, and it was when they took a functional MRI. So that's an MRI when the dog is awake, and they tested whether a dog had a preference for food or preference for interaction. And they could see, depending on what areas of the brain that lit up. And a huge number of dogs actually prefer interaction. So, and that's all a part of choice as well, which actually, what is reinforcing for your dog? Because often I go to families and they're using something that's actually not rewarding for the dog. And so it's not working. And they're, you know, the people are getting really frustrated and stressed because they can't seem to train their dog, when actually, in fact, the reward they perceive as a reward isn't actually rewarding for the dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like I even give a lot of dogs. Sorry, I was going to say I'd give a lot of dogs choice over treats. What treats are actually rewarding for them? Is it kibble? Is it ham? Is it venison? Is it whatever it is? And when I've worked with a dog with popcorn before, and last year for the first time ever, I don't know if that dog had a dietary issue, but I worked with a Samoyed, beautiful Samoyed, who loved mandarin oranges. So we used segments of mandarin oranges for an aggression issue. And whatever floats her boat. And once it's safe for the dog, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. And then of course it's not just the food, and it's not just the attention, but there's the toys and things like that as well. You know, every dog has their own drive, and it's just about tapping into that. And like you say, situational, because again, Ruby will normally do anything for food unless it's on a walk, where she wants like interaction, she wants attention, but not food. Like a lot of the time, depending, but not usually food. So it always comes down both to the individual, like you say, and to the situation as well. I was going to ask as well about misconceptions about allowing dogs to make their own choices. So are there a lot of I'm sure there's lots of opinions out there on choice, like everything with dogs.
Yeah, people feel like I'm just saying that when I say give choice, that we're just going to let the dog run willy-nilly out the streets and down the road and do whatever they want and run up to somebody and knock them over. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying give them, you know, at the same time, dogs love structure and routine. And it's not saying that you're just giving your dog freedom to sit in your kitchen counter and have their dinner. We're not saying that. We're just allowing them simple life choices. You know, even when I tell, when people are getting a new puppy and they're asking for advice and they're buying all these toys, I say, don't buy the toys. Wait, get to know the puppy. Bring the puppy to the pet shop. That's a great experience. Let them pick their own toys, whatever they find interesting. If it's a chewy, if it's whatever it is, put it up to their face. If they're interested, they'll walk away. Because I go to families all the time and you see these toys all over the floor and the dog has just zero interest, because most toys like that are designed for humans. You know, they're designed, you know, a lot of the time you'll see people with hippos or unicorns in their houses and dog toys, and that's great, but your dog doesn't know what a hippo or unicorn is. That was for you, the consumer. So you want to make sure that when you're purchasing something that it appeals to your specific dog, and every dog has a different preference, you know. So there's a lot of myths. Sorry, back to the question. Is a lot of people think that I mean when we're giving choice that we just let the dog, like dogs at the same time as have a mental capability of a 2 or 3 year old child. I'm also not going to let a 2 or 3 year old child decide, oh, I'm going to walk into the traffic. You know, we're not talking about that, but we're just talking about when you possibly can, then you go outside your door, and if your dog has a preference just to stay there and smell a tree, or to go left or right, or if your dog has a, you know, like that, if your dog was struggling eating a certain kind of food, that you might give them a choice. Or you might, like what I like to do with dogs is set up treat stations and see which one they have a preference for, because that's quite fun. And or like that toys, or like that petting. So we look for consent with dogs. If you're petting your dog and you stop petting your dog and your dog doesn't turn back to initiate the engagement again, well then that was rewarding for you, but not your dog. And so, and that can be sometimes hurtful for us as caregivers. However, that kind of choice, you're allowing your dog to make the choice whether they're engaged with or not. And that builds a massive amount of trust and security with your animal. You know, like that, not using your lead to pull them into situations if you don't have to. Obviously, there are situations where things happen in emergency, and we always obviously opt for safety. But when there's a chance, or when there's when something isn't that important, then see how you can work around it, and see, can you work towards getting your dog to make the decision that you'd like to make, get them to make a decision. Like when we're working with getting a dog used to a harness, or a dog that finds a harness aversive, or a muzzle recently, because I've been training with a lot of poor XL bullies to accept a muzzle because it's brand new to them. We always wanted the dog to make the decision. We want to set them up for success. And yes, we want them to wear a muzzle, and they mightn't actually ever want to wear a muzzle, but we get to the point, I'll never stick a muzzle on a dog. I'll wait to get to the point the dog puts a muzzle on themselves before I'd ever clip it on. And if I haven't got that far, it means that I'm on the wrong training plan or the training route to get to that point. Because if the dog makes the decision to put the muzzle on themselves, then I'm going to have a much easier transition getting them outside and accepting it. It's the same as, you'll know, groomers, any good groomers opt for consent in dogs, and they build up trust. And that's why you'll often find groomers can clip nails, and they can clean ears, and can do all the things that maybe you as a caregiver can't do for your dog. It's because they've spent a huge amount of time either desensitizing the dog or giving the dog that kind of autonomy back to let them say no, I'm not comfortable with this yet. And that's why you'll often get a good groomer who'll say, well, I wasn't able to do this today, but we'll do it next time, or here's something that you can do to work towards. And they'll generally never put a dog under pressure, because they know, working with obviously scissors and clippers and things like that, and the high level of the high risk of getting bitten in that scenario, that if they push the dog too far, they'll lose all trust, and then no one is going to be able to groom that dog again in the future. Because, having professions like veterinary and grooming, people forget they get in with, nobody gets working with dogs so they don't love animals, but they often forget, well, actually the dogs mightn't like them a whole heap. And they're also working on previous history of anybody else who's had handling or working with a dog. People are forgetting how lucky I am in my career that I don't even have to touch a dog if they don't want to be touched. And so that's why I haven't been bitten, because I don't have to be in that scenario where I put a dog under that level of pressure, and we give them choice, and I can spend the time waiting for them to consent or make the decision to interact with me. And that's sometimes hard, because I go into a house and I go, oh my God, that's the cutest dog I've ever seen in my life. I just want to smush that dog and give that dog a snuggle. And there are times, I have to say, that I'm guilty of giving my own dog snuggles when I know they don't want it. But at the same time, there's a balance, and, I obviously don't do that with clients' dogs. So there's times when I go to a session and I mightn't even touch or handle that dog at all. That's rare, but yeah.
But it's about, it is still giving them that autonomy as well if they don't want to physically meet you, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, that's one of the most important ones, I think, even, aside from enrichment and giving them freedom, it's the autonomy to allow when they want to be engaged with or not. And everyone should learn what it looks like for their dog to want and seek engagement, and when they don't. Excuse me. So when you start listening to your dog, you'll get that back tenfold. You'll much more likely, if you start to have a hands-off approach and only engage when your dog kind of seeks out kind of that affection, then you'll find that they'll probably seek it out much, much more often, and that's kind of hard for people to do, because we spend a huge amount of time like that in control of every aspect of the dog, down to the last, like weighing the dog's food and choosing the time of day that the dog eats and all of those kind of things. And some routine is really good, but even going to someone's house and having a choice of where you lie or what kind of bed you like, and often you'll find that there's one or two beds in the house the dog never uses, and they've made that choice not to do that, and you can probably get rid of them. But it's nice for the dog to have different options, and little things like that make a massive difference.
Definitely. Yeah, so you've mentioned the beds around the house. That's one that a lot of dogs appreciate. I know that personally here, Ruby loves to have a bed in literally nearly every room in the house, because she does love staying in all the, I suppose, in the lived-in spaces. You mentioned already about, like, I suppose what I would call sniffaries, letting your dog sniff when they're out and about, letting them. How do you feel maybe about letting a dog choose the route you go on when you're going for a walk? So leaving them kind of choose the way you go.
It's okay. In some cases, the dog wants to go straight to the park, in which your arms will get pulled off you, and that's not ideal.
Yeah.
But in most cases, we love doing anything like that, because it's such a confidence builder for the dog. When the dog has that not stressed of being tethered to you and being moved and manipulated every which way, and they actually can take the time to explore their environment, and when they actually get to make just little choices. some dogs don't want to make the choices, but if your dog has a preference, or it's sometimes quite interesting to watch what decision your dog makes, that can be huge confidence building exercise. We do that a lot with dogs that are very, very fearful and have never been outside, because giving them back choice, which is possibly something that they've never had before, is great for confidence building and great for building trust. So that goes against what most people think. Oh, I should never let my dog lead the way. Well, actually, that's a myth. That's not true at all. That has nothing to do with dominance or hierarchy or anything like that. We know dogs don't live in a pack, and I don't want to necessarily get into that. But giving them any kind of choice or freedom, you know, within reason. Again, we're not saying we want our dogs to walk down into the motorway or into an unsafe situation. But yeah, if they can make a decision, even if you're in the park, and they can make a decision whether they have a preference of going left and right, that is, or just standing still, or just lying there and enjoying the view and the sunshine that we got today.
Definitely, yeah. And I wasn't teeing this question up, but in talking about sniffaries and talking about like a little bit more autonomy on a walk, could there potentially be space for flexi leads in these situations?
Yeah, believe it or not, I am not anti-flexi lead. Everything has a purpose. Okay, would I encourage somebody to buy one? No, I don't think so. Do I own one myself? No, I don't. But they can be incredibly useful if you have a fearful dog. And generally, although they are considered unsafe because people don't control them right or use them appropriately, and that's the big problem with anything, they can sometimes be a lot safer than a long line from a point of view where obviously it sucks it back in and not. So I think everything has a purpose once it's welfare friendly, and if used appropriately, I think for some dogs they can be great. Again, it depends on who is using the item. Like the human, that's a human problem, not a dog problem.
It's always a human problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any other good examples now? So I think we've mentioned a little bit about the sleeping in the beds. Out for walks is a brilliant opportunity for giving dogs a little bit of autonomy. You mentioned food briefly. So are we are we checking to see if a dog prefers the routine or the autonomy in this situation? Are we fans of leaving out food for them? Are we, you know, how do we feel about there?
I'm a fan of free feeding. It lets the dog know that the food isn't such a high value resource. You can't do that with every dog. You have to work towards that. So I do not like when we see dogs hoovering their food as if they were competing in the Olympics. I think that gives a sense of that the dog is going into their food too hungry, and that lets us know about a history of the dog. And I would consider that, be it controversial, I would consider that an eating disorder. Yeah, in an animal. And that usually comes to play whether the dog is getting the right diet for them, if they're missing something in their diet, if they're not being fed enough, or if they have a history of too much controlled feeding. Like often you'll find in puppies, when they're being raised in a litter, they'll be fed from one big trough or one big tray rather than multiple bowls, which is appropriate. So if you, Killian, the puppy, push me, Susie, out of the way, I just toddle over to a new bowl rather than we're all fighting from the one dish, which is not really good from a dog psychology point of view. And then we tend to control puppies' food from really earlier on. And then we actually, I believe, we actually create a problem around food and food as a resource. And then dogs end up gobbling food whenever they see it, because if they see it, they got to eat it. Right? Actually, I find when I work with puppies, if we feed them lots of smaller meals throughout the day and we work up to what we call free feeding when appropriate, you can't do that with all foods necessarily, then the dog is much, much calmer, and you actually can then have a dog who, eats their dinner, but not like savaging it either. And I also like to give dogs choice of food. Like if we're finding, apart from medical complications or anything like that, I find that if your dog is just waiting till the last possible moment to have any food during that day that's from their bowl, I'm like, why are you feeding that food? There's so many options. You know, why are you doing that? Because if your dog is starving themselves all day, which is not natural either, and then waiting till 10 o'clock at night till there's nothing else going on and then eating, well, that's a really sad life, isn't it? It's like me and my salad and my apple. You know, there has to be some, like, especially dogs, because everything is sensory, and, you know, you know, it's like nice to nice. They, you know, most dogs they do like food and they see food as valuable for them. So why not give them something that they are enjoying once obviously healthy and well balanced? And there's a lot, you know, that's a big subject we could talk hours and hours and hours about. But yeah, I would prefer a dog is on a whole, if possible, free fed, not always possible.
Yeah.
And I would prefer that a dog is enjoying their food. Yeah.
Definitely. And like you mentioned as well, it's, you know, it's it was really interesting when you said about, you know, the behavioral aspect and comparing it to eating disorders, because obviously an obsession with food in any way, shape or form is basically some form of eating disorder. And you know, it's really, really interesting as well that you mentioned about dogs being too hungry, because like you know, dogs can get acid reflux from having an empty stomach. And especially if you're cooking around them, and they're, you know, they're producing, their digestive juices start being produced in their stomach, that can lead to acid reflux. And that could be why then, you know, if they don't get a breakfast, but they do get a lunch normally, but they've seen your breakfast, so they get acid reflux, it can lead them to them feeling kind of sick for their lunchtime, so they don't eat that and put it off. So you're so right, you know, like give your dog snacks as well, you know, within reason. And there's loads of healthy ones out there.
And
it's very interesting.
Healthy things, and it's really good fun to try like fruits and veggies, the safe ones, and seeing what your dog likes and what they don't like. And that, I think that's will he eat it, will he not? That's a really fun part of, you know, having a dog. And yeah, like I'm talking about in the broader scheme, you know, when I go in and I have a puppy and I see a puppy who's just eating their food, nearly you're worried that they're going to eat the bowl. I will often then work like I might work with someone with an eating disorder, and they might get 8 smaller meals a day and build them back up into not feeling so ravenous going into their food and not being absolutely desperate. But that's got to do with, you know, choice and control. And often, like, especially puppies are great, because if puppies then are underfed, or if they're really, really, you know, going in really hungry and not feeding enough meals, often they'll get really, really bitey and really, really cranky. And they're really great at showing you when they're not happy. And sometimes your puppy biting can be a simple thing as you're just underfeeding your dog, because we're all worried about dogs being obese. However, we don't look about how we feed dogs to begin with to get them so obsessed with food. And I would work with a lot of dogs who end up eating non-food items or have pica because they're either their dietary needs aren't being met or they're being underfed, you know, and we have to start all from scratch again. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we've mentioned about dogs making choices in and around their food, in and around where they sleep, in and around, you know, access to different parts of the house and things like that. Is it fair to say that it gives a chance for dogs' confidence to be built up, and also for maybe some of their problem solving skills as well to improve?
Yes. Oh, getting that brain engagement and getting them interacting and problem solving is so, so good. And you touched on something there, and, you know, giving them space in the house. In an ideal world, if we all had really giant houses, and if you do have a room or a utility or something like that, there should be a space in your house where you don't impose any choices on your dog. So new research that came out last year where dogs do really, really well. And what I mean by that is if they have a space where you're not giving them treats, you're not giving them engagement, you're not making them put on a lead, you're not doing things that they like, nor are you doing things that they don't like. It's a neutral space where they know they can be, and there is that freedom where no pressure is put on them, good or bad. You know, it's not a space where they get chewies. It's also not a space where you corner them to clip their nails or anything like that. And they have this kind of generally neutral space where nothing happens. And that can be really, really, really good for trust in dogs. And they'll often choose and selectively go in there when they're feeling overwhelmed as a kind of you know, because a lot of dogs don't have spaces to go in our homes. Now, it's not always possible because not everybody has the space to offer to the dog. But even if there is a space in your house where you go, well, we're just not going to ever feed them in here, play with them in here, you know, put leads on in here, all of those kind of things. So that would be really good, whether that was just a room in your house, and that would be a place where your dog was possibly most comfortable. Sorry, I went off topic there. What was the original question?
I'll re-ask the question in a second, but I was going to say, even you mentioned about space there for something like this. Like, Ruby, I know, is a small dog, but like her safe space is a teepee, so a little tent.
Yeah.
It's
So
actually
it
a
can be
child's
that.
teepee that we got for her. So she goes in there, and often usually she pokes her head out again and kind of looks out and keeps patrol. So I call her Pocahontas when she's peeping out of her little teepee. But yeah, so I think even if you've got a big dog, you can probably isolate, say, a bed or some sort of,
Mat, it can be
a large
anything. And it can
crate,
just,
or yeah.
yeah, it's just that space where you don't have any pressure on the dog at all, be it good or bad. They've proven it with both. It's not even that the dog has expectations of the good stuff happening, because not all good stuff is good stuff all of the time, but it's just a space where they can just be.
Yeah, exactly. The question was in and around, building their confidence and their problem solving skills as they've more autonomy and are making more choices.
Yeah, well, that goes back to kind of the settled training and things like that, and making good choices, and even decision making where they make themselves and something has worked out well for them and something has not. And that's really good, and really, really good for confidence building and letting them have freedom of movement where they might explore a certain space by themselves, without any kind of pressure from the human. A lot of the time that's lovely as well. You can do a bit of doggy parkour where it gives them the freedom to explore items where they can hop up and down or go through different things. And we know that from a lot of research, and a lot of the agility people or physio people or mobility people know is even getting the dog freedom of movement over different obstacles or through different obstacles by choice gets them used to how their body moves and what way they distribute their weight, and that can be all really good for I don't do enough of that in my training actually, but that all is really good for that kind of thing. And often dogs will, that's why a lot of the time dogs end up in a scenario where they opt for conflict, so their fight response, because their flight response has been refused so many times. So often if I'm walking with a dog who's reactive and I'll give them a little bit of a longer lead when appropriate, they'll often make the choice to move away from the scary thing instead of barking at the scary thing, because now I've given the dog the option to do that. Not in all circumstances, because it depends on the history of the dog, but often I'll point out to the caregiver that, look, your dog is actually deciding to move away from that scary thing rather than actually face it. It's just that we've been tightening our lead and we've been kind of driving them towards the problem. Nobody does things intentionally, but without knowing.
And it's, I suppose, like you say, we could be unintentionally kind of drawing our dogs into these situations and kind of going against the best advice of creating space in these kind of aggression situations, right? So yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah, or even social interactions as well. A lot of us will accidentally, when somebody wants to pet our dog, we'll say, "Oh yes," and sometimes we'll even hold our dog to keep them still enough to allow somebody to pet their dog. Pet our dog, but that's obviously not necessarily a great decision, and it should be. And people sometimes get really offended, but if the dog doesn't want to come towards them, but actually, doing that to your dog is not going to be good for your trust and their trust with you, nor is it going to be really good for the other people either. But it's not good for anyone involved. So allowing them choice where they make decisions on who socially they interact with, dogs or people, within reason. Obviously, we can't let them socially. I'm not saying go and let your dog leap or hump or mount or do anything like that to another person or another dog. That's not socially acceptable either. But when depending on the situation, we let them choose who they want to say and say hello to without forcing it, is another amazing thing.
Yeah. And I think some people unwittingly kind of put us in a bit of a position, like you mentioned, about coming up to us and it's particularly, I suppose, like people with kids, expecting to have this lovely wholesome experience, and I don't know, it's very difficult to say no, and it's difficult sometimes to advocate for your dog in that situation.
It is, and sometimes I'll say to them that my dog's not so sure, but would you like to throw them a treat? And if your dog is that's appropriate for your dog, that can often be a really good thing for kids. And I'll always say the word throw, because we don't want the dog to be handed the treat, because the dog might find that stressful, and then it's just going to poison treats and food rewards for you.
Yeah.
Or toy rewards or everything. But why don't you toss them a ball? Why don't my little dog, whatever, my dog Milo, maybe Milo doesn't like you handling him, maybe Milo doesn't like you whatever, but maybe Milo like you throw him a ball. And often then the person gets the engagement when appropriate, or toss a treat, always have treats on you, or that kind of thing. or have a polite phrase that says, you know, oh, my dog isn't sure of people that he doesn't know, and don't make it personal to that person. Make it a general term. So, and don't ever put it on the dog, and don't ever say my dog is nervous, because a lot of people go, but I'm really nice and dogs love me. And they don't, whereas if you already go in there with he doesn't like people he doesn't know, that makes it a lot easier. But it is hard to advocate for your dog. Really hard sometimes, because you want everybody to enjoy the dog that you have, and you want to be proud of your dog. And people can sometimes be a little bit standoffish. But you'll find if you find the right phrase to use, most people are quite polite.
If worse comes to worse, you could always say he has fleas.
Fleas, yeah. He's got rabies. Yeah. He's got COVID. Yeah. You can, he's been treated for an unknown illness. Yeah, he's just rolled in fox poo. Yeah, there's lots of things that you can.
You have options.
You can use in that scenario. You have options. Yeah.
Yeah, you're only bound by your own creativity. Perfect. So I'm sure there's loads of people now that would like to give their dogs a little bit more autonomy in their day-to-day, might feel a little bit nervous about it at the beginning. So what are easy changes that they could do as a first step? Maybe just very simple changes that they could start with today.
Give the dog a second bed. Give the dog another blanket on the ground. Again, like that, just doing the little thing where you wait for consent for your dog. You pet your dog, and if they don't look for it again, don't pet them. Give your dog options over training exercises. If your dog is just really reluctant to sit or really reluctant to do something and it's becoming a chore, don't stress them out and force them. Think of something else that they like to do. Teach them some hand targeting. You'll find that very quickly you'll win the dog around really fast once you decide to even do tiny small changes like that. Even how a treat is presented. Maybe your dog would rather have it tossed on the floor, and they'll see them getting excited about it, go and chase and find it. And even find it games are great for that, because they give the dog the chance to explore an environment and have freedom of movement, even around your house, to explore and sniff things. And they're doing it all by themselves without your intervention. So it's only little small changes like that. Even, put down 2 different treat types and see, maybe your dog will eat them both. Maybe they like one, maybe they won't like the other. That's kind of a fun game to play with. Different toys. See what your dog might, like, or making little puzzle toys, see what your dog might prefer doing. They're only small little changes. Or out in that walk, just take a pause at your dog sniff and see, can you follow your dog when appropriate? Like, if it is safe to do so, obviously let them off the lead if you can, and if they have a good recall, or start working on that recall. But anything you're doing with your dog, go, do I have the time? Is it appropriate? Can I let the dog make a choice? And try and start to include that when safe.
That's amazing.
So.
There's loads of safe, easy options that people have been given now throughout the episode.
And you're not looking to change your whole entire world or change their world or anything like that. And I don't want people to feel guilty that they feel that they haven't given their dog enough choice. But you can just start to implement little small things for them.
Exactly, little manageable steps. You don't want to do all the things at once, or your dog will think you're going mad as well. they'll lose trust in you faster that way as well. I
know. I started running. I train a couple of dogs a couple of times a week, and have been doing so for quite a long time. At the same dogs, and I decided I'd go running with them last week, and they looked at me like I had 10 heads. Also, they only walked marginally faster because I'm very unfit. But the experience, they just looked at me like, okay, what are we doing now? This was not a good decision, Susie. But that, giving them, I'm doing a lot of enrichment with them, and it's quite a fun. I've learned a lot over the months I've been working with them. It's kind of a special project. And I've learned that giving dogs choice, and like when I make some of the enrichment at home for them and I bring it down to them, or bring it over to them, so sometimes they love it, and then sometimes they have zero interest. So, and I get disappointed, I get deflated, but then I go, well, what do they like to do? Will I try and build an exercise around what they do like to do and give them that outlet? Any kind of scent games or anything like that is really good fun. I play a lot of cheese trees. So mashing cheese into trees a lot of the time. People probably think I'm mad. and letting them go explore and find it and lick it and make decisions what they want to look at, what they don't want to look at. Yeah.
Amazing. So yes, don't shock your dog with changing everything at once. Small little steps, but get out there and start having a little bit of fun with it. Your dog will appreciate it. Thank you so much, Susie, for coming on and chatting with us. Really, really appreciate it, and hope to speak with you again soon.
Thank you so much.
And once again, a huge thank you to Susie for coming on and chatting with us on the podcast this week. If you're interested in finding out more about Susie, about dogbehaviour.ie, about Ruby Reese, or about dognutrition.ie, please check out the show notes for all of our social media handles and websites, direct links, and all that good stuff. Quick reminder, we do bring out a podcast every single Tuesday, so we would love to see you back again next week for another podcast episode. Thanks for listening in, and have a great week.